Catch me if you can.
In our previous episode of Ripper, we examined the rumored suspects, including the infamous Jill the Ripper theory. In our final episode, we will be discussing the literary suspects, suspects brought forth by authors over the past century, each one lining up to claim the name of the coveted title, Jack the Ripper. The Jack the Ripper of 1888 would most certainly be out of place in the 21st century. His ability to stealthily navigate the darkened alleyways of Whitechapel would be greatly diminished in today's world of video surveillance, mobile telephones, and facial recognition technology. The temptation to communicate with police or to taunt the public would also be extremely limited. No longer would he have the anonymity of making prank phone calls like the original Night Stalker, or simply dropping off a letter to the local newspaper like Zodiac and BTK did, without the risk of leaving behind his DNA. And yet, for all of our technology, 130 plus years later, we still cannot positively identify who he was. In some aspects, mainly due to pop culture, Jack the Ripper has taken on the personality of a criminal mastermind, one so clever, police never stood a chance at catching him. He's become the Moriarty of murder. This, of course, is not true. The police during 1888 were simply disadvantaged when it came to investigating murder. While the police were dealing with no shortage of stabbings, strangulations, bludgeoning, or poisonings, the Ripper murders seemed to have taken on a completely different tone. And this was completely out of their traditional scope of investigating methods, as if something else had stepped into Whitechapel, something evil. Most of that atmosphere was due in large to the way it was covered by the press. The everyday onslaught of Ripper coverage was not to keep East Londoners informed, it was to keep them afraid, because fear sells newspapers. Often a mostly fabricated sensational headline would be just enough to keep the public on edge, but coming back for more. Jack the Ripper was good business for newspapers and tabloids of 1888. While the press continued making a fortune on peddling bad news, the police could not depend on the events revealed in the daily papers. They had to rely heavily on eyewitness accounts, as fingerprinting would not come into common practice in Britain until 1901. While sources show fingerprinting had been used as early as 1858, it would not be adopted as a police method for another 43 years. Often, blood in crime scenes would be washed away as quickly as possible, as to not be a reminder to the horrific events happening on their very streets. It just wasn't part of their investigative procedures to even think that blood, hair, or skin under fingernails would be of any assistance to them. The fact that they photographed Mary Kelly's eyes in the hope that the murderer's image might be imprinted upon it shows the amount of superstition that was still involved in their methods. However, in defense of the Ripper investigators for considering a superstitious approach, the Boston police had become so frustrated in their attempt to catch the Boston Strangler that they employed psychic Peter Hurkos. In some murder cases, the clues become so diluted or non-existent that police are willing to occasionally grasp at straws, as if for no other reason than to shake the dust from the case in hopes something will be loosed. By time of the Mary Kelly murder, it had become a desperate attempt to consider anything in order to stop the Ripper's rampage. But then, like a phantom, he disappears from the streets and is gone. One thing we've learned about studying serial murder is there are no absolutes. In most situations, if a serial killer stops, it's usually because he's either incarcerated for another crime, moved from the area, or has died. But Dennis Rader, the BTK, proves this theory invalid, as he went dormant 25 years before he resurfaced again. And who knows? He may not have ever resurfaced again if the news media hadn't tempted him by running a story on the anniversary of the first murders. To their surprise, he wasn't dead. He hadn't left the area. He had been living amongst them all along with no criminal record. The original Night Stalker, also referred to today as the Golden State Killer, committed his last known murder in 1986 and would not be caught for another 32 years. Like BTK, he too just stopped, married, raised a family, and lived quietly amongst his community. His serial killer life, remanded to news articles, podcasts, true crime novels, or a featured episode on one of the many true crime documentaries that littered cable television. Often there is a temptation to label Jack as the originator of serial murder. We all know that's not true, as there have been many others out there long before him with a long list of victims to their name. Jack most likely gets the moniker of being the first, as he was the first to enjoy media attention like no one else of the day. But what would Jack make of today's 24-hour news cycle? Would he be delighted that the name attributed to him and his crimes was even more famous today than it was in 1888? Would he accept the name Jack the Ripper and wear it like a badge of honor? Or would he hate it and create his own persona? The From Hell letter seems to be considered one of the authentic Ripper letters, and in this correspondence, the writer avoids using the name given in the Dear Boss letter. Was this his way of rejecting the name Jack the Ripper? One would think if he was going to take the time to communicate with the public, he would use a name he was proud of. Yet there's nothing in the letter to suggest that. He signs off with, "Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." Regardless, whether the actual killer embraced the name or not, the world has accepted that the Whitechapel Killer will forever be known as Jack the Ripper. And from that, we enter into our list of literary suspects. The Royal Conspiracy has long been a favorite of Hollywood and true crime fiction. In 1978, a film called Murder by Decree pits Sherlock Holmes against Jack the Ripper, with Christopher Plummer in the role as Holmes and James Mason as Watson, discovering the insidious Masonic connection to silence the Canonical Five via Dr. Thomas Spivey, clearly meant to be Sir William Gull. On the 100-year anniversary of the murders, David Walper produced a movie made exclusively for CBS television, their version starring Michael Caine as Aberline. This was a 2-night television event with 5 different endings filmed just in case they wanted to go a different way in the editing room. Ultimately, they chose the Sir William Gull suspect, but not following the Masonic theory. This one was due to Gull's mental state disintegrating into madness. It also employed use of coachman John Netley, psychic Robert Lees, and even included Richard Mansfield during his stint at the Lyceum Theater as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The following year, Alan Moore created the graphic novel From Hell, which also follows the Masonic plot, and again, Sir William Gull is the killer. Stephen Knight embraced the Masonic theory that includes Gull as the killer, assisted by Netley driving a coach with a royal crest on it for Sir William, the Queen's physician, and Walter Sickert as the bait. According to Knight's source, Joseph Gorman, who claimed to be the illegitimate son of Sickert, this was all due to silencing the Canonical Five from blackmailing the crown over the illegitimate marriage of Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence, to a common Catholic shop girl and sometime model for Sickert. In 1888, Sir William Gull was 72 years old. By this time, he had already suffered his first of several strokes. It would be hard to imagine that a 72-year-old man suffering from the effects of a stroke being able to manhandle women 30-plus years younger than him, even if she were drunk. Drunks can often be more combative than compliant. There are several versions to this, as we have covered in a previous video. Sir William lived at 74 Brook Street in London for 2 years and was the home where he died in 1890, which is approximately 4 miles to Hanbury Street. Walking would be over an hour, but we know Sir William would have never walked. He would have used a horse-drawn cab, which during that time most likely would have taken about 30 minutes, which is not unreasonable. But you really have to want to do this, and he'd have to have an accomplice. It's not impossible, but most likely not true. What do you think? In 1978, author Frank Spearing released his book, Prince Jack. Again, another royal conspiracy theory, not involving the Masons, but taking the rabbit hole path of Prince Albert Victor slumming in the East End looking for a good time, only to end up with syphilis. Once the prince realized what had happened to him, he then set out on extracting revenge. Of course, Sir William makes an appearance to assist His Royal Highness in giving him whatever treatments they thought would work in 1888. But what follows is a complete accusation of Crown and Empire covering up the most sinister of crimes of their day. Spearing, a larger-than-life character who referred to himself as the Columbo of true crime, was so bold he actually wrote a letter to Queen Elizabeth, essentially daring her to reveal the royal secrets and giving her opportunity to stop the publication. Elizabeth never answered, and the book went viral for its time and was banned in the UK. Often, Prince Albert Victor gets blamed for the canonical five in one form or another, but according to court records, he was at events in the presence of several witnesses on all of the murder dates. On the Polly Nichols murder of August 31st, the prince is recorded to have been staying at Danby Lodge in Grosmont, Yorkshire, with Viscount Down from August 29th until September 7th. On September 8th, when Annie Chapman is murdered, the prince is at the Calvary Barrack in York until September 10th. On the night of the double event, September 30th, he's in Scotland with Queen Victoria and has been there since the 27th. And on November 9th, when Mary Kelly is murdered, the prince is at Sandringham House in Norfolk and had been there since the 2nd and stayed until the 12th. Upon no occasion was Albert in London on any of the murders, unless you take Frank Spearing's account of a royal cover-up, and in order to make it remain 100% silent, royals had Prince Albert Victor also silenced. A week after his 28th birthday, on January 14, 1892, the official cause of death was pneumonia. J.K. Stephen was most famously connected to his cousin Virginia Woolf. He was a poet and tutor of Prince Albert Victor. In 1883, Stephen was assigned as a tutor before the prince was to attend Trinity College in Cambridge. During this time, according to Harrison, the prince and Stephen developed a homosexual relationship. And in the winter of 1886, he suffered a serious head injury in an accident. There are two versions of this story. One is from his cousin Virginia Woolf, that he was struck on the head by an object from a moving train. The other version took place while he was horse riding, and the animal reared and he hit his head against a moving weather vane on a windmill. Regardless of which is true, it's been reported that he suffered a bipolar disorder and was treated by none other than fellow conspirator Sir William Gull. This, of course, is where it all becomes a bit suspicious in regards to Harrison's theory. Harrison claims that Stephen was the Ripper and the prince was his accomplice. This is backed up by a psychologist named David Abrahamson, who contended that Stephen fit the psychological profile of Jack the Ripper and the prince as a willing participant, with Stephen as the dominant partner. Harrison claims the reason for the killings were out of revenge. Where Harrison fails is Stephen's ability to commit the murders and be in Cambridge on time to give lectures. Stephen was eventually committed to an asylum in 1891. The following year, when Stephen learned Prince Albert Victor died from pneumonia, he refused to eat and died 20 days later, age 32. The cause of death on his certificate? was mania. While we are covering the conspiracy section of suspects, Michael Maybrick, brother to another Ripper suspect, James Maybrick, is author Bruce Robinson's suspect. Robinson claims that Michael Maybrick, who was also a songwriter using the name Stephen Adams, is the one and only Jack the Ripper. He also cites the Masonic connection and blames a government cover-up, especially when it comes to the Golston Street writing, "The Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing." Again, this goes back to the claim by Stephen Knight in his book, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution. That writing on the wall was calling attention to a Masonic ritual in where Hiram Abiff, the builder of Solomon's Temple, was murdered by three men known as Jubilah, Jubilo, and Jubilum. And that Sir Charles knew this instantly, that the spelling of Jewez was not Jews in an anti-Semitic form as he claimed, but a reference to the three assassins. This is explained in detail in the film Murder by Decree. Robinson makes mention that while the other Masons did not approve of his depravity, they were obligated by oath to protect him. If you've studied anything on James Maybrick, his brother, you will know that Michael did not like his brother's wife, Florence, and he was key in getting the blame shifted to her for his death. I suppose if you're Jack the Ripper and a potential suspect, the best way to get the police looking in another direction is to point them towards your brother's murdering wife. If you're interested in learning more about Michael Maybrick as Jack, Bruce Robinson's 800-plus page book will give you plenty to ruminate on. Walter Sickert ends our Royal Conspiracy suspects. While there is a more detailed video on the link above, we are briefly including him in this episode due to the fact that he features in the Sir William Gull case, the Prince Albert Victor case, and according to Patricia Cornwell, was the Ripper on his own. Cornwell believes she alone, through mitochondrial DNA, proved that Sickert was the Ripper. In Sir William's case, as previously stated, he was the bait to get the victims into the coach where Gull was waiting knife in hand to protect the crown from blackmail. Sickert allegedly knew all of the canonical five. That, of course, is a strong possibility simply because he was around the area and spent many a night in the pubs of the East End, perhaps always in search of a new model to paint. His penchant for prostitutes was well known. The claim of his association with Prince Albert Victor, covering for him as he engaged in a private affair with one of Sickert's models or shop workers at his studio, then helped make arrangements for a secret wedding with the pregnant girl. If the government was indeed being blackmailed, Sickert would have been running the risk of imprisonment for treason, or worse, silenced by murder. However, it's been alleged that Sickert was in France at the time of the murders, and if that's true, we know he can't be Jack. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide if Sickert is a viable suspect. Cornwell did publish an additional book on Sickert, Ripper, The Secret Life of Jack the Ripper. I personally have not read this book. It should be noted that Sickert was never a police suspect and didn't even become part of Ripper history until the 1970s, when he's mentioned for the first time by Joseph Gorman. Also, for those of you who rate Sickert high on your suspects list, visit the YouTube channel The Margate Marauder. He's done a ghost box video on Sickert. It's worth a watch. Yes, the one and only author of Alice's Adventure in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass joins the rank of Ripper suspects. Author Wallace makes the claim that Lewis Carroll left clues in his writing in the form of anagrams that would reveal a confession. One such book is The Nursery Alice. The anagram reads, "If I find one street whore, you know what will happen. 'Twill be off with her head." Wallace backs up his belief in Carroll being Jack due to a mental breakdown. There's a hint that he was being bullied by older boys when he was younger, and that in turn made him snap as an adult. And it was off to Whitechapel, knife in hand. With codes and anagrams, Wallace weaves his theory that begins to sound a lot like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. While Lewis Carroll may have been dealing with demons from copious amounts of opium consumption, there doesn't seem to be much credence to Wallace's claim that Lewis Carroll was Jack the Ripper. While Jacob Levy is not truly a literary suspect, we promised a viewer that we would mention him in this episode. Born in Aldgate in 1856, he followed in his father's trade as a butcher, and by 1888, he was living in Middlesex Street with his wife and children, which was right in the heart of Ripper territory. Levy contracted syphilis from a prostitute, making revenge a probable motive, which seems to be the main reason behind several of the other suspects. He was a butcher and did possess the necessary skills to remove certain organs from the victims. It's been stated that his wife claimed that Jacob does not sleep at night and wanders the streets for hours. Jacob's brother Isaac lived in the Wentworth building on Goulston Street, where the famous writing was found. There is speculation that it was he that was spotted during the attack on Liz Stride, and after killing Catherine Eddowes went to his brother's home, left the writing, and secured himself in his brother's flat until it was safe to return to the streets. It should be noted, his Middlesex residence was also very near to where Catherine Eddowes was killed. Levy has a great deal of circumstantial evidence against him. He lived near Joseph Levy, and it's possible he is the man Sir Robert Anderson could not get to give evidence against on a fellow Jew. He was later placed in an institution in August of 1890, where he died later from complications of syphilis in July 1891. James Kelly, no relation to Mary Kelly, has the distinct claim of being the one prisoner to escape Broadmoor Lunatic Asylum for nearly 40 years. In 1883, just 17 days after getting married to Sarah Brider, James Kelly murdered his new bride by slashing her throat. He was caught and convicted to hang, but that sentence was later commuted and he was eventually remanded to Broadmoor, where in early 1888 he managed his escape by using a makeshift key he fashioned from a piece of metal. Once he was out, he hid in London during the time of the Ripper murders. After the Mary Kelly murder, he managed to get passage out of the UK and make his way to France, to eventually traveling to the United States, settling in New York City. New York City Police Detective Ed Norris, in a documentary for Discovery Channel, takes on James Kelly as the Ripper, handling it like a cold case. He believes James Kelly, after doing the Whitechapel series, escaped, came to New York, and continued killing in the same fashion on prostitutes such as Carrie Brown. In 1891, Carrie Brown was known to locals as Shakespeare, as it was her lifelong dream to become an actress. At some point, she encountered a customer she took back to her room in the same manner as Mary Kelly, and was later found to be murdered in the Ripper style. However, at the same time in London of 1891, newspapers were claiming any prostitute killed by knife was another Ripper murder. So if it was James Kelly, he obviously could not be in two places at once. But the New York papers were no different than the London press. Any ghastly murder was slapped with a headline, "Jack the Ripper Strikes Again." These headlines were essentially the clickbait of their time, meant to do nothing more than sell papers. John Morrison, a Mary Kelly enthusiast, claimed that James Kelly was her common-law husband, and after killing his wife to be with his pregnant lover, Mary Kelly, who rejected him during the trial, she fled from Liverpool to London. He claimed that Mary Kelly was the reason he escaped from Broadmoor, made his way to London in search of her, systematically eliminating any prostitute he questioned in order to cover his tracks until he eventually found Mary and extracted his final revenge upon her. Morrison would, from his own money, eventually provide Mary Kelly with a proper headstone. Whether John Kelly was Jack the Ripper remains to be seen. He eventually returned to England and to Broadmoor, asking to be recommitted. He was at first denied due to the fact that he'd been away so long that officials felt there was no reason to remand him. But in 1927, he was taken in. When asked where he was and what he was doing during all that time, he said he'd been in America, fighting evil. 2 years later, on September 17, 1929, John Kelly died in Broadmoor of pneumonia. Joseph Barnett becomes the central figure in Bruce Paley's book, Jack the Ripper, The Simple Truth. Paley believes that Barnett was deeply in love with Mary Kelly and didn't want her to be on the streets. In order to keep her from drinking and prostituting, he would read the accounts of the other murders to her in order to scare her off the streets. They seem to have had a huge argument over another prostitute that Mary brought back to the flat, Maria Harvey. Barnett, according to Paley, believed Mary was engaging in a lesbian relationship with Harvey, and this caused the argument in which the famous window was broken. Angry, Barnett left. Even though the two became estranged, they did see one another on the streets and in pubs as friends. On the night of Mary's death, it seems that Barnett followed her and an unidentified gentleman back to her flat. He waited for a time for the man to leave, but eventually gave up and left. While most accounts show that Barnett was in a relationship with Kelly and did live with her at 13 Miller's Court for a time, and he did testify after her murder, Paley paints Barnett as obsessed with Mary. In today's terms, he would have been considered a stalker. He was jealous of her attentions to other people and wanted her all to himself. And if he was truly in love with her, it would have been hard for him to see her sleeping with strangers and being drunk. But it's also not unreasonable to consider, after her last client on November the 9th, Barnett gained access to the flat, or she allowed him inside. And in a final argument, he lost his mind and destroyed her. Paley creates 12 bullet points to blame Barnett as Jack. They are as follows. 1. He would have kept the key to the room he shared with Kelly, and after completing the homicide, went out and locked the door using that key, which had not been lost as he falsely claimed. 2. His physical description resembled the person who was described accompanying some of the victims before their murder. 3. He dwelt in the center of the Whitechapel district in 1888 when the crimes occurred. 4. He most likely met the other murdered women who would have let their guard down in his presence, a circumstance that explains why they did not defend themselves when attacked. 5. It was learned, and he admitted it himself to the authorities, that days before the murder he had quarreled with Mary Jane Kelly. 6. It was speculated that Catherine Eddowes suspected he was the killer. Her murder may have been simply to eliminate a dangerous witness. 7. After Annie Chapman's death, an envelope that belonged to Barnett was found in the courtyard of Hanbury Street, who could have lost it when he committed the murder. 8. He was of Irish origin, so he could have written the From Hell letter addressed to George Lusk, which contains idioms from that language. 9. As a fish porter, he filleted fish and possessed an appropriate weapon that matched the knife with which the killer inflicted the cuts to his numerous victims. 10. On 30 September 1888, the night of the double event, the escape route taken by the murderer led to Barnett's home. He could have even washed his bloody hands in a fountain near Miller's Court, where he lived at that time. 11. A tobacco pipe of his was found on the scene of the Mary Kelly murder. If he had taken all of his belongings a few days before and no longer returned to the place as he said, it is not explained as to why this object was still there. 12. He had reason to perpetrate the excesses of Jack the Ripper. He was not alienated or psychotic, but an intelligent and cunning individual who, precisely because of these characteristics, the police never managed to catch. Is Mary Kelly the crescendo of Jack the Ripper? Is it a one-off? Is she even a Ripper victim? What do you think? Does Joseph Barnett fit? Was he Jack? Or was he just Mary's killer? He was last known to be living at 106 Red Lion Street in Shadwell with his wife, Louisa Barnett, in 1919. She died on November 3, 1926. Joseph Barnett followed her in death 26 days later on November 29, 1926. Before we go to our final suspect, we mentioned that we were planning on covering Charles Lechmere. At the time of writing this episode, we found that we had written a large portion of the script on this suspect. We decided that it actually deserved its own episode. So as to not rush or disappoint, we are producing a single episode on Charles Allen Cross, also known as Lechmere, in the coming weeks. While we know many of you were looking forward to this suspect, we want to take our time and really dig into some of the questions we've encountered on our research. Rest assured, we have not left out Charles Allen Lechmere. As we have seen thus far, the list of potential suspects knows no boundaries. No one is immune from being accused of being the monster of Whitechapel. Even Oscar Wilde at one time was considered. It seems sometimes all you had to be in order to be considered as a suspect was simply being alive that fall of 1888. Author Robert Graysmith, who is most famously known for writing his best-selling true crime book, Zodiac, on the Zodiac murders of the late 60s and early 70s, has tossed his hat into the arena of authors, making the dubious claim that he has solved the mystery of who Jack the Ripper was. For Graysmith, he is none other than Pastor John George Gibson, the fourth man of God to take the reins of Emmanuel Baptist Church in San Francisco. It features a new minister who hails from Scotland, arriving to assume the new leadership position at the church. A church with a sordid, decadent past that involves ghosts, orgies, and a haunted bell tower. The first pastor taking his own life by cutting his throat with a straight razor. The second pastor shooting himself. The third murdered the co-founder of the San Francisco Chronicle, where Graysmith would work during the time of the Zodiac. And now we have pastor number 4, who seems to arrive as if he's escaping from somewhere or something, with a mysterious scar on his neck, for which Graysmith never clarifies, but he covers with a red scarf. Perhaps in an injury during one of the Ripper murders. Who can say? At some point during his new tenure as church leader, 2 young female parishioners are found murdered in the bell tower. Blanche Lamont, 18, horribly strangled, and her nude body arranged in a position of prayer, and Minnie Williams, age 21, stabbed and crucified. A young man named Theo Durant was blamed for the murder, convicted, and hanged, allowing Pastor Jack, the real murderer, to escape into the misty, fog-covered streets of San Francisco, and just like Jack the Ripper so many times before, would disappear without a trace. This is a case I believe we will come back to and cover more in depth in the future. So what do you honestly think became of Jack? Did he stop killing after Mary Kelly? He could have continued on his murder reign somewhere else, or as stated earlier, been locked up for an unrelated crime or died. The possibilities are endless. Some believe the case should never be solved, even if it could be. If 100% DNA proof were to solve this case tomorrow, would you believe it? Whatever the truth is, and whoever he truly was, the mystery of Jack the Ripper will forever continue on as new Ripperologists join the community and each take their turn at attempting to solve the coldest of all cold cases. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper.